the May 20th, 2021 meeting of the Radnor Township Zoning Hearing Board. And we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Brad, good evening. I see that you're with us now. Thanks. We will begin by continuing the hearing on appeal number 3093, the applicant C.G. Wayne LLC, the property located at Eagle Road and Radnor Street Road and zoned P1 planned institutional. The applicant is requesting a variance from section 280-112 to permit disturbance of man-made steep slopes and such other relief as deemed necessary by the board. And as noted, this was continued from the April 15, 2021 meeting. Is Mr. Mahoney with us yet? Okay, I don't see him, so it may actually be premature to proceed on this. Mr. Falcone, I think you're here. Good evening. Good to see you.
Good to see you all.
But I should have looked to see if Mr. Mahoney was with us before going through that process. So why
John,
don't we?
He's on as an attendee. He's going to be rejoining as a panelist in 1 second.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'm sorry. Yeah,
He should be on right now.
Okay, excellent.
There he is.
Mr. Mahoney, good evening. How are you today?
There he is.
Okay, so let's proceed. And before we jump right back into things, for the record, I'd like to advise, and members of the board and parties are aware of this. I asked the solicitor to reach out to the parties to be in a position to present their thoughts on the issue, fundamental issue of whether the board has jurisdiction to hear this appeal at this time. And the issue, as at least one member of the board saw the matter, was that in as much as the property is currently planned institutional, I believe, is that correct? And well, it's split zoned, but there's the R1 portion of the property is not in controversy here. Because it was PI zoning, and because there I don't believe had been a specific request for a use variance that would permit the development that has been the subject of the discussion to date, that perhaps the question of whether a jurisdictional issue existed that would prevent the board from moving forward with the application. So in the first instance, Mr. Falcone, if you're ready to comment on that issue, I'd appreciate hearing that. And then obviously, to the extent there are board questions, and then Mr. Mahoney, if we could hear your thoughts, if you have any on the issue as well. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thank you, Mr. Riley. This application was submitted following a determination issued by the township's zoning officer, which instructed us to seek a variance from the zoning hearing board as part of a land development plan that we had submitted. That land development plan, although you note, is subject to the PI zoning regulations today, is presently moving forward, but has stalled out while the Board of Commissioners are awaiting a determination from this board with respect to disturbance of the slopes. As we discussed at last month's hearing, any development of the property, in our opinion, requires a disturbance of certain slopes on the site. We are proposing, as you know, a development that is residential in nature, and ultimately have a map amendment that has also been submitted and is pending before the township as well. That has been stalled for consideration while the issue of steep slopes is being considered. So before submitting our application to the zoning hearing board, we did submit a determination request to Mr. Kachansky. I believe he's on the line as well. And we've marked that letter as Exhibit A11 and submitted it to the zoning hearing board this evening. So we see it as a threshold question. We believe that we've been told essentially that the Board of Commissioners won't entertain any proposed development for the site until we cover the issue of slopes, and they've stopped all consideration of either the map change or the land development plan until the zoning hearing board renders a decision with respect to slopes. And again, that was also the direction of the zoning officer.
And understanding the procedural predicament that presents, not to be too alliterative, for the applicant, do you consider the Board of Commissioners request to resolve the steep slope issue something that would otherwise provide this board with jurisdiction where it would not otherwise exist?
No, I think this board has jurisdiction by itself because of the provision of the zoning ordinance. So that's why when we submit the application to Mr. Kachansky, ultimately, Mr. Riley, if the Board of Commissioners were to deny or refuse to accept a map change, the Board of Commissioners would then determine that we need another variance from this board and would direct us back for use purposes. So this does not preclude that board from saying you need additional relief from the zoning hearing board. In fact, oftentimes the board, the planning commission, they won't hear a land development application until zoning relief that would otherwise allow that application to proceed is rendered. So they'll say, go get your zoning relief. That doesn't mean we're going to approve your plan, then come back and talk to us about your plan. So it's possible that this board could grant relief tonight. It would then shift back to the Board of Commissioners and they could say, we're not going to approve a map change, in which event we would be either abandoning this project or back in front of you for a use variance.
And your position is that the advisory opinion that was provided by the zoning officer constitutes sufficient action that creates the jurisdiction that is required by the MPC?
I do, as well as a review letter from your township engineer, which says you need relief for steep slope disturbance.
Okay, are there, thank you, Mr. Falcone. Are there
Thank you.
questions from the board for Mr. Falcone on this issue? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Mahoney, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
I don't have any objection to Mr. Falcone's statements. I think they're correct. And if there was a problem with jurisdiction, I would waive it for purposes of this hearing so you could move forward.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just add something. I don't think from my reading of that opinion that the chairman sent around, I don't know that jurisdiction's waivable. I'm gonna have to ask our solicitor, but I don't think you can waive jurisdiction.
I don't think
Under the MPC, either we have it or we don't. I happen to think that we do have it because in that particular case, jurisdiction was not conferred because the zoning hearing officer never acted upon this request for a advisory opinion. And I don't think we can refer to it as an advisory opinion because that seems to be the kiss of death, both in the case that you sent around, John, along with some of the other cases that I've looked at in which that case is cited. So once an application though is made to the zoning hearing officer, which is what I interpret has now happened here, and he has rejected that. Now we have an appeal, now we have jurisdiction.
Well, I think procedurally the chronology, John, is slightly different in that I believe the applicant requested the thoughts from the zoning officer on an issue that was relevant to a plan that they were considering. They received the letter and then brought the appeal to this board to, in essence, override or for relief from the prior the prior opinion that was rendered by the zoning officer. I think that is the procedural history, as opposed to there was a filing of the plan that's in front of us. The zoning officer then acted. I thought that the request was just one for advice in the first instance, and then we proceeded from there. But if that's incorrect, please let me know.
Yeah, because I think that's the essence of the case that you sent around, the number which escapes me right now, but yeah, that's it. I mean, there was jurisdiction can only be conferred under the statute by one or two specific things taking place. And if we've been asked for our opinion on something, that opinion and some of the others I've read don't seem to give us jurisdiction.
And we
Mr.
aren't asking
Solicitor,
for your opinion. We aren't asking for your opinion tonight. We are asking for
Yeah.
actual relief. Yeah,
Yeah.
with respect to the slopes.
I have a question, John. It's Rich Weitzman speaking.
Hey, Rich.
Was there an actual denial of a permit application or denial of an application in this case?
No, there was, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Falcone, why don't you answer that?
No, there was no denial. There was no permit sought, and that's not required for jurisdiction purposes. There
But it's a
was,
letter, but the appeal is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Falcone.
of course, no, please.
But the appeal is based on Mr. Kochansky's letter, correct?
The appeal is based upon the direction from the township zoning officer that the applicant needs zoning relief with respect to its land development application.
Okay.
I don't know.
Mr.
From my
Solicitor,
reading of the
any-
case, I think we're on thin ice, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's my concern. I think it's very similar to Dara v. zoning hearing.
Dara, thank you.
Well, I hate giving
So-
you legal advice. It sounds like someone's asking for it, but I'd hate to give it to you during the open hearing. But
Yes, and for the life of me, I have not figured out how to go into a brief executive session on Zoom to get legal advice from our solicitor.
I don't know if Ian can help us with that, but I mean, I think factually, I mean, obviously there's facts here, I think, that are distinguishable from the DAR decision. So, you know, without getting into it too much deeper, unless we can go in an executive session, there are facts in this case, I think, that are obviously different. In fact,
I think we should go into executive session if possible. I'm looking at the opinion and I don't want to go into reading it while we're here, but I think we should do that.
So
Okay,
if I could
here's-
just offer one thought on this.
Sure.
You have a zoning ordinance in place. A plan has been submitted for land development purposes. The township engineer and the township zoning officer have determined that in at least one instance, the plan is deficient with respect to zoning requirements. And they've directed us to seek zoning approval from this board. You are explicitly charged under your charter with making determinations as a zoning hearing board with respect to your zoning ordinance. We're not seeking an opinion from this board as to whether or not we can proceed. We are actually seeking a determination and opinion from this board, a rendering that we may obtain a variance. You're the only board in the township that can grant a variance. And the only way that can be done is with respect to an application to the board. If we were seeking a determination from this board as to whether or not we needed relief, then I think you might have a jurisdictional question because there would be nothing pending before the township. That's not the case here. You have an active pending land development application that requires zoning relief. There is no other avenue or opportunity for the applicant to seek relief other than from this board at this time.
And you filed this, whatever you want to call it, application on a piece of property that is still zoned PI, with a little piece of it that's R2 or R1. And you're willing to have us consider the steep slopes issue regarding the property as it presently sits, with its present zoning classification.
That's correct.
And did you file?
That's correct. We're seeking only,
And what did you file to bring that before the zoning officer?
we filed a determination request under the MPC with respect to a determination as to whether or not these slopes were exempt from the zoning code. And if the zoning officer had determined that they were exempt, we would not have needed relief. But when he said because as part of our land development application, your township engineer identifies areas of steep slopes. So either we proceed and get relief from the zoning hearing board, or we get a determination from your zoning officer that the slopes are not subject to the codes of your zoning ordinance. We attempted to do the latter. That was denied, and the zoning officer, Mr. Kachansky, said, you need to go get zoning relief. Now, to your point, yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I appreciate the advocacy, but I do think that we need to have some time by ourselves to go over this.
And Mr. Falcone, with respect to the actions of the engineer, is there a provision in 909.1 of the MPC that provides the zoning hearing board jurisdiction on that action? Or is it simply the letter that you obtained from the zoning officer that constitutes the request, or constitutes the claim of jurisdiction of this board?
You don't need to look really any further, in my opinion, and I guess you can consult your zoning officer and solicitor, then we do not comply with a provision of your zoning ordinance. And in order to move forward in any respects with respect to your application, we have to seek relief from you. We have no other alternative. We can't move forward with any application until we obtain relief. And you're the only body in the township. The Board of Commissioners don't have it. The Planning Commission don't have it. Only the zoning hearing board have the ability to grant relief from the zoning ordinance. And we have been advised, and our application for land development shows that in this respects, with respect to at least steep slopes, we are deficient. If it becomes apparent at a later date that there's another provision of the zoning code that we do not comply with, we would need to seek additional relief from this board.
Okay, and just so I'm crystal clear on the chronology, because this is one of those instances where it does make a difference. The plan that has been submitted for review, that was submitted for review prior or at the time that Mr. Kachansky was asked for his advice on the application of steep slope?
The plan was pending before the determination, because we had a determination from the township that there was a slopes issue, which ultimately led us to the zoning officer to make a determination.
See, that word determination really worries me because it doesn't fit into anything that the MCC is talking about.
But ultimately, John, Mr. Kachansky's determination as the zoning hearing officer, he has the ability to make a preliminary opinion with respect to your zoning code. An applicant has the right to seek from a zoning officer a preliminary opinion with respect to the code, and then to rely upon that preliminary opinion in the event the opinion is favorable to the applicant. In this instance, Mr. Kachansky issued an opinion that said the zoning code does not provide you an opportunity to proceed with land development without obtaining zoning relief, and you need to go get it. I think, in all honesty, I don't see any jurisdictional question here, because you're the only board in the township that can issue a variance.
There's no just okay. Why don't we do this? I am in order to proceed. I think the board does need a brief period of time with the solicitor to hear advice on this issue, and then to render a determination as to whether the board has jurisdiction or not. To do that, that's going to be a little bit complicated. I'm just going to advise the board now that in order to conduct this executive session, I'm going to send to each of the board members and to the solicitor an invitation through my company's video conferencing system, so that we can quickly address this issue and then resume the hearing. I suspect that this is going to take 15 minutes, 14 minutes of which will probably be me typing email addresses to get everyone the invitation. But watch your emails. You're going to get an invitation to a WebEx in on which we will conduct the executive session. But for the present time, this hearing stands in recess. Thank you.
Ian?
We're getting there.
Unmute. You cannot start video because the host is stopped. I guess Ian's got to start up my video again.
Yeah, John, we put that, we turned the camera off just to make sure that there was nothing being shown during the
Oh,
executive.
okay.
Yeah,
So
you're
do I click start? No.
Yep,
I
you're
can
good.
see you now. I can see.
Oh, wow. I
Just
missed
wanted to
that.
make sure that that was held completely private.
Good.
We're not back on the record. I could have thrown my iPad out the window, but that only would have taken care of my issue.
John, I can't seem to get my video back on.
Okay, if we can do whatever we need
Oh, there we go.
to reconvene, Mr. Mahoney.
There you are.
thank
You're
you.
back, Hank.
Back.
A couple members had to log out of the WebEx application we used for executive session, and they're coming back into Zoom. So we'll have a minute or so. Thanks for your patience. I'll note that on the record as well, but thank you for your patience on that.
God bless you.
There are many appearances for Mr. Falcone on my screen.
He's everywhere.
So,
It's like chicken man.
if only I were everywhere on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Um,
Well played.
so a lot of my clients didn't get invites. There was something wrong with the invite, I guess, that Ian sent. So I forwarded mine along to them. So there'll be more of me.
Okay. Okay, we'll try to keep it straight. Norma does not appreciate this, and there will be issues that you'll need to resolve with her. But okay, if everyone is back with us, Brad has just rejoined us as well. We will, if Brad, can you hear us?
Yep, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, Norma, we'll go back on the record. Thanks. Everyone, thank you for your patience during executive session. There were technical challenges, but we were finally able to convene that session and tried to wrap it up as promptly as possible. But we do appreciate everyone's patience while we did that. I would like to ask if there is a motion to be made by, I'd actually like a motion to consider the question of whether we should proceed with the appeal. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so Norma, you got those? Board discussion on the question of whether to proceed with the appeal?
I think we've had enough discussion, thorough review of the current posture of this application, and also our discussions with our counsel. I think that we have jurisdiction to move forward on this matter.
Are there any other thoughts from members of the board? Okay, hearing none, I will call the vote. So the members participating in this appeal, Mr. Weitzman,
I'm in favor.
Ms. Foreman,
In favor.
Mr. Lord,
In favor.
Mr. John Nagel,
In favor.
And I am also in favor, so that is 5-0 on the question of jurisdiction. That motion carries. And with that, Mr. Falcone, if you'd like to proceed, please proceed.
Sure, absolutely. Let me get myself together here. So I guess I'm going to attempt to share my screen if I can, and see if this works.
And while you do that, to the extent that there are witnesses who will be participating, I would remind those witnesses that they remain under oath if they were sworn in during the first part of this appeal. Thank you, Mr. Falcone.
So I'm trying to see which screen you guys are looking at.
We're looking at the letter from Kevin.
Okay, great. That's the goal. So we'll go from there. Now I can't. Got it. So just a couple of things. We are back, as the board is aware, with respect to the zoning application we have for disturbance of steep slopes on the site. We put on kind of extensive testimony at the last hearing, as did Mr. Mahoney. And we are simply here to supplement our record at the request of the board with respect to the actual areas of disturbance that we are seeking to disturb. I'll note a few things. We have submitted a revised plan, and this is what I'm showing on the screen now as Exhibit A12. And this plan highlights in red the specific areas of steep slopes and the complete area of requested disturbance that we are seeking. The red areas are identified on the plan, and those would be the only areas that we are seeking disturbance of. As you recall from the last hearing, there were additional areas of steep slopes on the site. We are not seeking any additional relief than those simply identified in red. And those areas, as we had mentioned in the hearing last, are specifically attributable to the existing parking lot located on the site. And we would like to remove the existing parking lot, and in doing so, we'll be disturbing slopes on both sides. These slopes also deal specifically with the entrance route and the driveway serving the site. I will also note that the plan you see here is a plan that has been designed for only 18 lots and has been designed with respect to the R1A provisions of the township's zoning ordinance. That is based upon discussions we've had with the neighbors and specifically Mr. Mahoney. The applicant has stated before this board, as well as the other boards in the township, that they are willing to accept a condition not to exceed a certain number of lots on the property. And that number is 18 at this point. And they would accept, obviously, a condition of any disturbance of these slopes that there not be more than 18 lots on the property. In addition, the applicant has started the process and has delivered to neighbors who are represented in some respects by an attorney. They've also, I believe, shared with Mr. Mahoney, as well as the owner of the property, Eastern University, a proposed deed restriction that they do intend to place on the property that would limit development of the property to no more than 18 lots, as well as limit any future subdivision requests. And that would encumber the entire property, as well as any lot that was developed on the property. And that is with respect to promises made by this applicant to the neighbors during the process. Again, those are probably facts outside of your consideration tonight, but it is important, I know, to some folks that are listening and that are aware of this application. And it is the intent of this applicant to be good on its word. And so following up on the hearing last night, we're submitting this exhibit, which I've marked as Exhibit A12, and submitted to the board by electronic mail earlier today. And this plan shows, again, I believe it was at the request of Mr. John Nagel, an overlay of the proposed disturbance areas against the proposed lots on the property. And so that's what we're showing here. And we are seeking no additional relief from the board, simply a variance request to disturb these specific areas and no others.
Did you say this is R2?
This is an R1A
1A.
design.
I only see 17 lots. Is
That was 16.
So the 18th is up here. That's the
Oh.
existing R1 lot.
Right.
thank you.
And then 17, 16, and so forth around. So we have no additional testimony. I do have my witnesses here, the same as last month, but the testimony remains the same. As we understood it, we were asked to prepare this exhibit specifically with respect to the overlay to show very limited areas, those areas that we are seeking relief from. So we would obviously accept any condition of approval that any disturbance not go beyond those areas specifically shown on this plan.
John, you're on mute.
muted, John.
My best work. Any other board questions for Mr. Falcone? Okay, Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you. Mr. Falcone has outlined the agreement in principle that I have, on behalf of several neighbors, have with the developer, Concordia. The most important of that, which is that the two lots are going to be limited to 18 subdivided lots. And there'll be a deed restriction, as Mr. Falcone indicated, which will not allow for any further subdivision. It's important to note that they're going to continue on with their application for an R2 rezoning, but that the zoning of R1A is going to apply in terms of standards and measurements and things of that nature. Most specific of which is the 30,000 minimum square foot lot in an R1A. So this was a fairly good compromise, we felt, with the developer. And I want to thank Mr. Toohey particularly for his willingness to reach out to me and engage in conversation and compromise to reach this solution. For purposes of the zoning hearing board, I'm going to maintain my party status, and hopefully we can reduce the agreement in principle to something in writing within the next 30 days. If that comes to fruition, I would anticipate withdrawing any objection I have to the proposal, but I will retain the ability to file an appeal if we don't have something reduced in writing in terms of the agreement. So I just want to let everybody know that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mahoney. Any questions from members of the board for Mr. Mahoney?
Can we get the tile back up of the people?
Oh, geez. So Norma, there you go.
Great. Any board questions for Mr. Mahoney? Okay, thank you. Ian, are there any public participants on the participation line that we need to hear from?
John, we have a few members of the public. I'm not seeing any raised hands for public comment.
Okay. Okay, then on that basis, we will proceed. Mr. Falcone, is there anything else from you, or you wish to have your exhibits entered into the record?
So I do wish to have the exhibits entered into the record, but I will also note, kind of in following what Mr. Mahoney offered, this applicant has been willing to work with the neighbors. And I should note that Mr. Mahoney, like many of the other neighbors in this area, has been willing to work with them kind of in return. And that's allowed for a development like this to move forward and to get buy-in. And I think it's a good example, and we are appreciative of Mr. Mahoney's efforts to entertain the discussion and to come forward tonight and offer his thoughts on it. So we believe it's moving us in the right direction for this development, and we hope the board sees it as well.
Okay, thank you. With that, I would ask for a motion on the application.
Well, I would move that we approve the application to grant the relief from the steep slopes as shown on, I don't know if I know the exhibit number, but the
A12 is the plan.
A12 is the new exhibit.
A12, the new exhibit that was submitted this evening regarding the 18 lots entitled 18 lots R2W/parking lot slope variance, just for purposes of identification, sheet 1 of 1, that the variance shown in red on that sheet, that the steep slopes, or the variance requested for the steep disturbance of the steep slopes shown in red on that plan be granted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Solicitor, I'm assuming you got the motion. Okay, great. Board discussion on the motion.
Yeah, I'll go, John. It's Rich Weitzman. Yeah, the idea here of the betterment to the property, the betterment to the stormwater management, and most certainly the fact that there's community support for this project to move forward, I think, justifies our consideration. I'll leave the legal analysis to everybody else on whether or not there's a hardship, but I don't believe that the applicant created the hardship, and as a result, I'll be in favor of the motion.
Thanks, Rich. Other thoughts?
Go, John.
Hey, Jamie.
Because the community is in agreement and they have reached this compromise, I'm comfortable. I also drove by to see the property and I agree with Rich. It's an improvement. And I think it's the minimum that they're asking based on the redesign with the 18 homes. I'm comfortable voting yes.
Thanks. Anyone else? Anyone else? I'll jump in just quickly. I do appreciate the applicant's flexibility in coming back with the plan, and certainly also in working with the members of the community to arrive at a plan which provides the opportunity to develop in a meaningful way, but also is responsive to the contributions from community members. With respect to the issue of hardship itself, I think, based on the testimony that had been submitted previously, these slopes are problematic from the standpoint of permitting the property owner, full enjoyment of its interest in the property, and made very difficult the ability to successfully develop or redevelop, the property in a manner that is economically viable, but also sensitive to requirements that the community, or expectations that the community would have. So I do believe there has been a showing of unnecessary hardship. I am supportive of the motion, and when we get to voting, I will support it. Mr. Nagel, John Nagel.
I would just like to add that in addition to everything folks have said so far, is the realization that any development of this property would, in most likelihood, be in front of us for some kind of variance for the exact same issue. There's doesn't appear to be an economical way and profitable, which is a reality of folks to be able to develop the property.
Great. Any other board comment on the motion? Hearing none, I will call the vote. Mr. Weitzman.
Aye.
Ms. Foreman.
Aye.
Mr. Lord.
Aye.
Mr. John Nagel.
Aye.
And I also vote in favor. So that is 5-0. The applicant's relief is granted. Mr. Falcone, thank you again for your participation. Mr. Mahoney, also thank you for your participation, and also the flexibility in getting to a place where the folks can feel a little bit more comfortable about the development. So thank you very much. And that concludes the hearing on 3093. Jamie, I understand you have a prior
Thank you all very
engagement.
much.
I understand you have a prior engagement that you will need to leave for. Thanks for hanging in. I know it was probably a little longer than you were expecting, but
All good.
okay, super.
Thank
We'll see you. I think we've got a meeting with June 3rd. Is that the
I think
Kevin?
I'm
Is
not,
that
we're meeting in July because I'm off on June.
Yes, we
What's
do
that?
have a meeting June 3rd.
Yeah, we've got a special meeting on June 3rd, and then our regular meeting June 3rd.
Yeah,
June
17th.
17th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jamie. Have a great evening.
You too.
Okay, so we will now call appeal number 3090. The applicant Radnor Rockwell LLC, property located at 1001 Eagle Road and zoned PI planned institutional. The applicant seeks a special exception from section 280-68B to redevelop the subject property with a home for the aging and life care residents. Excuse me. I would note that the board members participating in this matter are Mr. Delizia, Mr. Weitzman, Mr. Lord, Mr. John Nagel, and myself. I would also note that this is a special exception case as opposed to a zoning variance case, which I am sure we will be reminded of by Mr. Brosman. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Riley. We were here tonight to request a continuance of this hearing. I had sent a letter in and I had had emails with Mr. Economides. That's what I was wanting to discuss with the board.
Okay. And Gus, I'm sorry, I probably have those in my mailbox.
No problem.
Sorry about that. We
No.
would have flipped the order had the chair not had a brain freeze. I apologize.
No worries.
So the continuance request is for what purpose, Mr. Brosman?
We had filed this application with a blanket time extension, and we weren't aware that it was going to be on this agenda. And it also has to be referred to the Planning Commission. So that didn't occur. But the primary reason we're asking for the continuance is my clients have been engaging with some of the neighbors in the area, and we'd like some more time to do that. My clients have had some meetings and would like to continue on with that process before coming in front of the zoning hearing board. So we were asking the indulgence of the board for a continuance to allow some more time for that to continue on.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want to stand in the way of discussions with members of the community with respect to the application. But if I can go back to the statement that you made a bit earlier, the application was filed, and was it roughly contemporaneously that a continuance was requested after the filing? I mean, I certainly wouldn't think that this was sort of a placeholder type of a filing that was perhaps submitted to toll other things that might be happening with respect to the zoning code or land development more generally in the township. But am I correct in understanding that the request for the continuance was made almost immediately after the submission of the initial application?
What we did was, and I've done this frequently with more what I would call high profile applications. When we filed the application, I didn't ask for a continuance, but I provided to the zoning hearing board what I call a blanket extension of time. And because I anticipated, time would be needed. to have dialogue. So I granted what I call a blanket extension of time for the board to hold the hearing. And so it wasn't technically a continuance request. And to touch on your other point, we did not file this as a placeholder of any kind. We're not aware of any changes to the ordinance or anything like that that was afoot. So it was just that it's a larger property. We thought there would be some interest, and I've done that probably not in Radnor before, but in other places. So that's why I did it here.
Okay. Okay. Are there questions from members of the board on the request for the continuance? Okay. Seeing or hearing none.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. Sure.
I'm sorry. I never like to interrupt anybody. I also didn't discuss the timing of the continuance. I don't know if you would like me to do that, or you want me to wait.
Well, when do you think you'll be in a position to come before us with something actionable?
So I went over the dates on the agenda for both the planning commission, because this project is also would be a land development. It would have to go to the planning commission. I went over the planning commission dates and then the zoning hearing board dates. And, my personal feeling is that it would be too aggressive to try to get to the June 7th planning commission meeting. I know my clients is still trying to set up even more meetings. So that would put us, there's a planning commission meeting right after the 4th of July, July 6th, and a zoning board meeting on July 15th. I know the zoning board doesn't typically meet in August, so I would prefer to come back in September, just because I know how things go in the summer. So I would suggest that we shoot to go for the September 16th zoning hearing. To bring this in front of the board in the summer, I think would be maybe perhaps not well received by the neighborhood. But that's of course at the board's discretion.
Okay, thank you. I would move that we grant the continuance requested to the September meeting of the zoning hearing board. Is there a second?
Second.
Any board discussion? Okay, hearing none, I will call the vote on this one. Mr. Delizia?
In favor.
Mr. Weitzman?
In favor.
Mr. Lord?
In favor.
Mr. Nagel?
In favor.
And I'm also in favor. So, Mr. Brosman, if we don't see you on other matters before September, we will see you on this matter at the September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Okay. We turn now to appeal number 3095. The applicant, the trustees of the University of Pennsylvania, property located at 145 King of Prussia Road, zoned PLO, Planned Laboratory Office. The applicant is requesting a variance from section 280-123B of the code to install a wall sign higher than 15 feet above existing grade and such other relief as deemed necessary by the board. Mr. Falcone.
I'm back just when you thought you were rid of me here. So you may all recall that the trustees had previously submitted a zoning hearing board application that was considered by this board, but a pretty long time ago, I think. But in any event, that application had a
I'm sorry, Dave, I'm sorry. My bad. Mr. Nelson, you're entering an appearance on behalf of the township. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Hi, good
I've been
evening.
authorized to oppose this application by the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Falcone, please continue.
No problem. So we were previously before this board seeking relief at that time for a sign that was twice the size of the proposed sign, maybe more than twice the size, as well as relief to install that sign above 15 feet. Based on the hearing and the discussion at that hearing and specific questions raised from the township during that hearing, we went back to the drawing board and we considered options very specific to what we were encouraged to consider during that hearing. One of which was maybe a shield with just the word Penn. And so we went back, evaluated whether we could make that sign and make it conforming in size. And we did just that. So the application you have before you tonight seeks no relief with respect to sign size, but instead seeks relief at a height above 15 feet. And you'll hear some testimony this evening, though I did speak with Mr. Nelson earlier, and I think he is going to suggest, and I am going to as well, that we do incorporate that prior record from the hearing, because much of the discussion tonight will be similar. And, we'll try and abbreviate that for your consideration for those that were on the board. So I'll leave it to Mr. Nelson to object to that, but my sense was I thought that was a good idea and we would support that as well. So specifically, the sign that we're seeking tonight, as you may know, is in the PLO zoning district. It's a wall sign. The ordinance limits wall signs to no more than 40 feet. The proposed sign is 40 feet. So again, compliant. It is being proposed at about 51 feet, a little more than that, 51 and a half. And that is on the top segment of the parking garage that abuts Route 476. The building, unlike the last time we were before this board, is now open and operating. It's a functioning ambulatory care center in the township. All the rest of the signs are installed. They were compliant signs. Prior to our last meeting with this board, this application was considered and recommended for approval by some agencies in the township. That was when it was much larger, same height. The application tonight, again, is conforming. So kind of not to belabor it, I guess I'll share my screen and then call my first witness, who's Eric Swanson, who is with Ballinger and who is the architect on this project from the very beginning. So let me see if I can make this screen share work. How'd I do? No, not great yet. I'm working on it. There we go.
That's perfect.
It's a real process. So the exhibits that we've marked, we show here, it's A1, it's a copy of the deed to the trustees. A2 is a copy of our application. A3 is a site plan. A4 is the garage sign specs. A5 is additional garage signage, and A6 as well, just different views and renderings of the sign, so the board has the specifics that it needs. A7 is the Blue Route view heading south, 285 feet from the sign. A8 is the view from the Blue Route heading north, which is 325 feet from the sign. A9 is the letter visibility chart. A10 is the CV of Josh Jacobson, and A11 is the CV of Mr. Swanson. If there are no specific questions for me, I'll get right to Mr. Swanson, who I believe was admitted as an expert in architecture and design during the last hearing, but I would offer him again once he is sworn and the board has an opportunity to consider his CV for the same expert status.
Okay, Norman?
Yes, if I can see Mr. Swanson on the screen, if you'll raise your right hand.
Hi.
I need his picture.
Oh,
Okay.
here I am.
Hi.
Here I am,
Okay.
and unfortunately, I'm one of the other Dave Falcones.
Oh my gosh, that's going to drive me crazy. Okay. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you, and state your name, please, for the record.
Eric Swanson.
Thank you.
And in an unfortunate turn of events, this Dave Falcone does not live in Radnor, so it's a loss all around for me. So what I have up on the screen, I guess we can go back to my screen share. Do I have to re-engage that, or can Ian do that?
Yes.
Let's see.
If you could
here.
just reshare your screen.
Yeah, let's see. I can do that. It was working so famously before. And let's see if we can do it again. How's that? All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So Eric, if you could please state and spell your name for the record.
Eric Swanson. That's ERIC. Last name Swanson. SWANSON.
And by whom are you employed?
I am employed by Ballinger, an architecture and engineering firm in Philadelphia.
And what is your position with Ballinger?
I'm an architect and senior principal with the firm.
And Ballinger's been engaged as the architect for the overall development of this ambulatory care center in Radnor Township. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Could you
you've been
spell Ballinger for me, please?
Yes, that's BALLINGER.
Thank you.
And Eric, you were chiefly assigned to this project. It was your project.
Yes.
And is what we've marked as, let me go back up and check here, Exhibit A11, and I'll scroll down to it, a copy of your CV?
It is. Yes.
And how long have you been an architect?
I've been an architect for a registered architect for around 38 years.
Okay.
Maybe.
And you've offered testimony before in Radnor Township.
I have, yes.
So I would like to have Mr. Swanson moved in as an expert in architecture. Again, I believe he was previously admitted, and his CV is A11.
Thank you, Mr. Falcone. Mr. Nelson, any thoughts on this?
No objections to Mr. Swanson testifying as an expert witness as presented.
Thank you,
Okay,
Peter.
thank you. And yes, the board will admit Mr. Swanson as an expert. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Riley. So, Eric, if you could, for the board's purpose, and again, understanding that they have a pretty good understanding of this site and I think of this application, but maybe using some of the exhibits, starting here with Exhibit A3, just describe exactly what the nature of this specific application is tonight.
Yes, tonight we're talking about one sign on this site plan. It's sign A. So in this plan, the blue route is on the top of the page, sort of slanting from left to right down the side there. King of Prussia Road is on the bottom. And then the main entrance to the Penn Medicine Radnor site is the intersection right there at Raider Road that comes in and goes straight back towards the parking garage. The sign that we're talking about is on the parking garage, which is what is facing the blue roof at that point, not on the building itself. And as you'll probably remember, and you'll see from the other exhibits, to remember that the blue roof is higher than the ground around the building at that point. The ground slopes down towards the Norristown high-speed line, which is between the blue route and the parking garage.
And so, Eric, I've gone to Exhibit A4 on the screen, and are you able to describe for the board what this exhibit shows and confirm that Ballinger, under your direction, prepared this exhibit?
Yes, this is the sign that we are proposing now, simply the Penn shield and the 4 letters for Penn. You may remember before it said Penn Medicine, and so that made it nearly twice as long as what it is today. It still at that point had the shield. So what we're proposing is the shield in its standard colors, or the Penn colors of red, white, and blue. And then the letters themselves are white faces, but stainless steel sides. And they're set off from the building. And there is a proposal, they are proposed to be lit at night, much the same as the Penn Medicine sign that is on the other side facing King of Prussia Road on the canopy to the building.
And Eric, you designed these signs, is that correct? Or this sign, is that correct?
We designed the idea of the sign. The drawing itself was done by HES, but yes.
And what we're showing on exhibit A5 is, can you explain that for the board as well?
Yeah, so this shows the location of the sign on the topmost panel of the garage. And then what you see there to the left are the sort of
Sorry, I lost him.
Yeah, there may be a bandwidth issue. Hold on.
and then the blue route.
Eric,
is,
so we lost you there for a minute.
I'm sorry.
Norma, are you able to let him know where he let off, or should he just start over? What's easiest for you?
I can read his last answer. He said, so this shows the location of the sign on the topmost panel of the garage. And then what you see there to the left are the sort of.
Okay. You sort of see how it relates to the grade around it. So from the bottom, as Dave said, it's about 51.5 to the bottom of the sign, 54 to the top. And then the top dashed red line is really the approximate height of the blue route as it goes by the site. So you can see it's about 26.8 to the bottom of the sign from the blue route. The dashed line below that blue route is the 15-foot height limit. And you can see that that would fall in one of the openings of the garage. So if we were to try to conform with that, we would actually have to push the sign down to the panel below that, which would put it plus or minus below 12 feet to the top of the sign.
And Eric, I'll ask, using this exhibit, even if the wall itself were solid at that point, there was no closure, or there was no opening, I'm sorry, at the 15th location, showing here kind of with my cursor,
right.
Would that area itself fall below the grade line of the blue route?
Yes, it would.
So it's the location of the proposed sign, and we'll get to that question a little bit later, or some more discussion, above 15 feet. I just want to make it clear, in your opinion and for the board, at 15 feet, irrespective of whether there's an opening or a closed portion of the garage, it would fall below the grade of the blue route.
That's right, yes.
And would not be visible from the blue route.
Right.
So we'll move next, kind of gingerly here, to A6. So this is what we've marked as exhibit A6. Eric, is this helpful at all for you? Can you describe what this shows the board?
Yeah, this is just our rendering that, it's not an actual photograph of the building, but
I think we lost him again. Is that right?
constructed to what the sign would look like. I'm sorry, am I breaking up?
You are.
Yes. Can you hear me now? I don't know what, sorry, what's happening. Dave, it may be more helpful to go to an actual photograph, the actual photograph, since this was done for the design of the sign while the building was in construction.
And so I just want to use this before we move real quick. All of the other signage that is located on this site, is it conforming to the provisions of the township's code?
It is conforming, yes.
And can you explain for the board, and I'll flip the exhibit here, why in this instance we've chosen a higher sign? Why didn't we go with, or better yet, because I think you've just answered already, why we didn't put it at 15 feet, but why not something less than what we're proposing? What's the meaning behind this height? And here we've got exhibit A7 up on the screen.
Yes, I think you can see from this photograph, and this is from Google Earth, so it's a little bit higher than you actually are in your car, is that the visibility to the site is obstructed by a lot of those telephone electric lines that run along parallel to the Norristown high-speed line. And anything that's lower than that begins to the telephone poles begin to interfere with the legibility of the sign. We also wanted to put it furthest away on the corner of the building rather than maybe more in the center, because that window of openings for the tree between the trees is very short. And so when it's on that corner, you have the longest visibility for it, and you need to get off. As you can see, the green exit sign is just there ahead. So we wanted the maximum viewing time for the sign so patients know where they're headed and can make the decision and not be slamming on their brakes.
Eric, can I ask you, with respect to the site, and you were involved with the applicant from its acquisition, correct?
Yes.
Did the applicant excavate this land to lower the building to create a new condition that would place this garage on a lower grade?
No, these were all existing conditions and grades that we worked with.
And the material, I guess I'll say, that you see here kind of down on the right, the trees and some of the transformers and fences located just off the blue route here that are really the items that impair the star. Well, actually, I should say, what is the star showing you there on this exhibit?
The star is showing where the sign would be located if it were at that first solid panel at a plus or minus, well, it'd be about 12 feet above grade.
And that star is essentially behind the brush and the fencing that you see in the foreground here. Is that correct?
That's right.
Is that the trustee's property?
No, that is part of the Norristown high-speed line right of way.
And do the trustees, I mean, just for clarity, have the right to clear that brush?
Not that I'm aware of.
And do they have the right to move the poles that interfere? And we'll see those poles on another exhibit here, but do we have the right to move those poles?
No.
And I'm going to show with my cursor here, and I'm not sure if the board can see it, but on the very left side of this building, is there a telephone pole located that's obscured by kind of the gray coloring on the garage?
Yes, there is.
And that pole exists kind of all the way down the building from the second to top portion of the garage all the way to the bottom. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when we flip to the other picture, and you can see a little bit of it in the shadow to the left, the optics of that pole run east and west as well, or left to right to impair vision. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So let's flip to the next slide here. Here is Exhibit A8, which gives a better view. This is a view heading northbound on the blue route. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the location of the star again shows what would be a permitted location.
Right.
And while the star is visible, in reality, does the actual location sit behind the barrier that you see next to this truck?
It does, yes.
So the star itself is basically sitting on the barrier in this picture.
Yes, and as I said before, this camera view is higher than a typical passenger car vehicle.
Understood. And as we look at this configuration, and I think this picture is most helpful just to understand what is there with respect to telephone wires and other utility lines. Can you explain kind of what you're looking at and that I'm circling with my mouse?
Yes, as you said, there are telephone poles, utility lines, multiple of them that are visible, particularly in this direction, that obscure the face of the garage, virtually all but the topmost corner.
And I'm going to identify this picture is dark, and I'm hoping maybe I can zoom in for the board and for your purposes. And indeed I can. The marvels of whatever this is, technology. So on this picture here, again, we're using I don't even remember the exhibit number. Let me go find that real quick. Exhibit A8. What have I done? So on exhibit A8 here, we can see a pylon or a pillar on the parking garage. I'm moving the kind of the mouse up and down on that area. Is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And that would be considered kind of the rightmost pillar as we move past the sign location. Is that correct?
Yes. The one that we were looking at before, yes.
That's correct. And so I move up to exhibit A7. And if we look at this exhibit, that pillar is where I'm identifying with the mouse, which is to the right of the plan. It's the only visible pillar or pole from this location. Is that correct?
Right, yes.
When we go back and I identify this area for consideration as to why this sign cannot move further to the right as we look at the building from the other direction, which would bring it clear of the telephone poles. So when we look at this exhibit, we now moving to exhibit A8, there are other areas that are less encumbered traveling north that are located further to the right of the proposed sign. And I'm showing those with my mouse. Do you see that?
I do.
Would those areas be visible while traveling south as a result of the trees located next to the property?
No, they wouldn't.
So the only segment of the garage that has actual visibility heading south on the blue route is the segment located where we've located the sign. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the impairment of that view is a natural condition and not one created by Penn. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we've already stated, just I want you to confirm again, that the slope itself from the blue route was also an existing condition and not created by Penn as a part of its development of the project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In your opinion, can you explain for the board, and again, I think we could probably maybe shorten this discussion a little bit, but explain to the board the significance and importance of signage to the trustees and why they feel they need a wall sign in this location.
Yes, well, as I think everyone's aware, this is a medical facility. While it's not a hospital, it does provide complex diagnostic and treatment for a number of services, including cancer, including ambulatory surgery, cardiology, radiology, et cetera. So people who are coming here are not just coming for a quick doctor's visit. They are coming to spend some time here. They're often coming very early in the morning, and they are under stress in trying to find the place that they're intended to go. So in all large medical facilities, identity, visual identity, and signage is an important consideration for our clients. I would say both signage but wayfinding also, trying to ease patients' concerns and their visits. As you know, it's pretty, can be very stressful going to the doctor, particularly early in the morning or for the elderly, et cetera.
And one of the things we talked about at the last hearing was whether this sign is actually important or is used in wayfinding or whether it's simply branding. When you design a building like this, is a sign like this, and again, you may have just answered it, but just for clarity, is it only for branding or is there a wayfinding component or is it only for wayfinding and not for branding?
No, it's primarily for wayfinding. Certainly, any client wants name recognition, wants to have their brand visible, but in this instance, it really, I think, is first and foremost is for patient wayfinding.
And why do they need signage for wayfinding when they have Google Maps and Apple Maps and Waze? Why do they need that?
Well, not everyone navigates by those means. Not everyone has a smartphone for that matter, or is comfortable doing that, particularly while driving. I think most of us still look for visual clues, even to make certain that we're, particularly if a turn is coming up, if you have a visual clue, it's always makes it easier. For people.
And, one of the criteria, probably the most significant criteria, is whether or not this sign serves a purpose, a real purpose, and whether or not the location, the relief we're asking for is in fact the minimum necessary to achieve what we need to achieve. So you've identified it as a wayfinding as well as a branding sign, but why can't we, in your opinion, place it somewhere else on this building, lower, sideways? Can you just kind of be clear whether you believe there's an opportunity for a lower sign that will have a similar impact?
I do not think there is, just because of the existing conditions. People's eyesight tends to go to the roof line for one thing, but as you can see in this photo and the others, there's just a lot of visual clutter any further down on the structure that you go. And then, as I said before, the window of visibility is quite short. And in order to have it legible, we want it as far to the corner as it's better the far to the corner it is.
And will this sign be visible from any residential properties surrounding this location?
Not to my knowledge.
And you've visited the site, you're familiar with the area?
Yes, I drive by it virtually every day.
Do you believe there'd be any detrimental impact to the community or the neighborhood as a result of the installation of a sign at this height?
I do not.
And with respect to the overall signage package for Penn, again, they identify this sign, they exit the Blue Route, correct?
Yes.
And you believe a significant number of Penn's patients will use the Blue Route as access to this facility?
Yes, we do.
Objection. What's the basis for that belief? I mean, come on. Have any studies been done where these patients are coming from? Yeah, this man's an expert in architecture, not.
Well, Peter, let him answer, because there were studies
Well,
done,
I don't
so let
think
him
he
answer.
should be answering, actually.
He was part of those studies. Yeah, he's part of the studies.
I did not perform the studies, but certainly Penn made an analysis of where their patients come from when they were looking at this property. And we also, for traffic engineering, we mapped where the sites were coming from. And I don't remember the numbers, but a good deal of them are arriving from the Blue Route, headed in the southern direction.
And so, Eric,
David, you're not introducing any of those documents as one of the exhibits to this hearing, correct?
We are not.
Okay.
So, Eric,
if I could ask a question real fast, to either of the council's knowledge, were those materials or discussion of those materials presented at the prior hearing?
The idea that patients were traveling the Blue Route to the site was discussed at the prior hearing. No materials were submitted, and the relevance of that is only as part of the wayfinding process, is that we're offering the significance of this sign.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe anything was, any hard numbers were introduced at the prior hearing. Thank you.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Hey, John, it's Brad. I just have a real quick question for this witness, because I just want to make it clear that it's on his record that his testimony is going northbound on 476. This sign is a wayfaring sign.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I said that. I didn't mean to.
You did, because I think that was the thing that concerned me, is you missed the exit. It's not like you're going to see Penn on your left-hand side and go, oh, I'll get off the exit. It's literally, I'm going to Conchi and I'm turning around. So, and honestly, I don't think most people are looking to their left when they're driving. If anything, they're looking to the right. So, again, I know you're doing a lot of testimony to say, well, it has to be up here and it has to be in this corner, because if we're going northbound, you know, and I'm just kind of looking at this going, if you're making the Wayfarer argument,
Yeah,
all you're thinking about is southbound.
I am thinking about southbound. I probably meant to say coming from the north.
Okay, and
Thank you for.
Since you're probably familiar with the area, are there many buildings that have more than 2 stories in this area?
In this immediate area, yes.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
say that there are a couple in the PLO district.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess what I'm thinking about is there's a reason always for one code, and certainly if you're allowed to build a building that's greater than 2 stories, like here, but the code yet says you need to keep it at 15 feet. There's a reason for that, and I think it's about aesthetics. I think it's always about that, and maybe more of the uniqueness here is the fact that you're next to 476 as opposed to it being a height restriction. Because again, one of the aspects that I think we have to decide, which council accurately said, is this the least amount of relief necessary for the variance? And I guess if the Wayfarer comment for southbound on 476 is the premise for this, the hardship per se, because Lord knows you're getting very good use out of the property without the sign, although I think there's a temporary sign there. It's been there forever. I'd like to hear a little bit more about why, with this viewpoint in particular, this slide, why you couldn't go on the 3rd or the 2nd, or even the first, the pillars that go up, why those aren't viable. Because again, if your whole point is just being able going this way to see that sign.
I think that what is maybe, again, you probably traveled this and you're going quite fast when you do it. The reason that I don't think it works moving it further right is because that window of viewing is so short. This is a moment in time, in fact, really the first moment that you actually, almost the first moment that you can see the building. And by the time you sort of pick it up, you're almost past it. So I think by moving it further to the right, you decrease that viewing time for the sign. And when
again, you're not asking for a variance to move it to the right. You're asking for a variance to move it up. And my question to you is, why can't you move it down? If it's viewable at 476, even at 20 feet, 25 feet, 30 feet, that's the minimum of relief necessary.
Yeah, and I realize this is not a very high resolution photograph that you're looking at, but though that one pole particularly is right in the way of any sign that moves further down the building.
And just to put on the record, this is not the only Penn facility in Radnor. And in fact, there's a Penn facility that's fairly close to this facility as well, that's been operating there for years.
Well, that facility is closed now. This replaces that facility.
Right, but it was operating within blocks of this region for years and years without a need for signage to do wayfaring.
Well, no, it couldn't have signage on the Blue Route. It did have signage for wayfaring on two streets
that were in compliance with the township regulations.
They were in compliance at the time. I think they're actually larger than what we have on King of Prussia Road today.
Yeah, I guess my point is your facility was working fine without this signage here before. Be it at a different location, people were still finding Penn using Google Maps or something like that. Again, if the whole purpose is we got to be able to find this building, that's your. I mean, again, I don't want to. I'll wait for council to restate the hardship here, but if the hardship is, well, I get a wall sign, and if I put it in the code, no one can see it, but I absolutely need I need it. And we're kind of going, okay, give me the absolutely need it. Show me that. But again, I'll let you know. Again, I got my question, so I'm good. I think we'll leave for the hardship discussion later on.
So Eric, I guess I'll piggyback on some of the questions that that Brad was offering you there, because it does speak directly to the hardship. And I think some of the questions we just got now, we got similar questions at the last hearing about the other Penn facility. And I think it's clear. I mean, just to state the obvious, is this the other Penn building?
Yeah, I'm sorry that you broke up for a minute there for me. I'm not sure what's happening with my internet connection.
So the question for you is this facility that we're seeking relief for the existing or prior Penn facility? Are we seeking new signage on an old facility?
No,
Has this facility been operating for years and years in this location and we need new signage?
this facility has been only open a little less than a year. And so we do need new signage, yes.
And although I don't think it's necessarily relevant to this application, I think some of the questions we were just asked, I think we have to clarify. There was signage on every frontage in the prior Penn facility, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Were there any topographical impairments on that site? Anything that you're aware of that would have disallowed you or made it impossible for those signs to be viewed or difficult to be viewed from a compliant height?
No.
And the signs in that instance were all compliant because there were no conditions that would, in your opinion, have required relief. Is that correct?
That's right.
Is that same situation in existence here?
No.
And I mean, just let's hit it head on. In your opinion, are there natural features on this site that preclude this sign from being viewable at 15 feet or less?
It is not able, there is nothing that would make it viewable.
And you're familiar with the township's code, correct? You studied it when you
Yes.
designed this building?
Yes,
And you're permitted to have a wall sign here. Are we seeking relief in your understanding to actually install a sign on this wall?
no,
And but for the natural conditions, would Penn be seeking relief?
I don't think so.
They would have installed the sign at 15 feet, correct?
Right.
No.
No, I think maybe Mr. Nagel disagrees, but he can offer those questions later. So did you consider placing this sign lower? Was that one of the exercises you were tasked with before we came back tonight, installing it at a lower pillar height?
We did look at lower sign locations, yes.
And based on your analysis, and we have another witness that's going to offer testimony on signage, but based on your design analysis, do the existing conditions, the utility poles and the grade impair the sign being located one pillar lower or one, how would you describe that? It's not a pillar, it's a
spandrel, a horizontal architectural piece. Yes, a spandrel.
Spandrel?
Spandrel, S-P-A-N-D-R-E-L, yes.
Okay, so spandrel. Can we, in your opinion, can the applicant install this signage in an effective way, a way that doesn't require relief on one spandrel below this?
I do not believe it would be effective.
And why is that specifically?
It's obscured by the telephone pole.
And we used, and I had up on the screen Exhibit A8 earlier because it shows a different orientation of the telephone poles. Is that correct? Or the utility poles?
Yes.
And I'll go back to that. And I'm offering this exhibit not for, and I think it was a very good question earlier, not to show necessarily the hardship traveling north, because you are by the exit at this point. Is that correct?
That's right.
But to show perspective of this collection of utility poles. So looking at this picture, how many utility poles do you think you see?
Well, right in that area of the garage, there are at least 4. I think it's 5 total.
If we go back to A7, what you see, can you really identify those poles?
What do you mean, can I identify them?
On this angle, are they obscured by shadows or coloring?
Oh, yeah, it's much harder to see them here because they are similar to their backdrop.
But you've been to the site physically, correct?
Yes,
And in your opinion, do those poles obscure signage lower?
yes, they do.
Okay, so I'm not going to kind of belabor the point. The issue that we've identified here, I think the hardship Mr. Swanson's discussed, this testimony as well as the testimony at the last hearing, I think is probably sufficient for our record. So I'll turn Mr. Swanson over to you all and to Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, questions for this witness?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Swanson. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. So I think you testified before, unlike the last hearing, this property has now been operational for almost a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's began to see patients, albeit not very many, in June of last year.
Okay, I think the testimony last year was that some of the medical activities had started for a couple of weeks when the hearing was held on June 4th. Do you have any reason to disagree with that now?
No, it's just if I said that, then that's right.
Okay. And as far as you know, the building is fully operational at this point in time?
I don't think it's fully operational, but mostly operational.
And in comparison to the variances you were seeking in last June to now, you've dropped entirely the size of the sign, but the height variance you're keeping, and the proposed sign is at the exact same height as the one back in June, correct?
It is.
And actually, okay. Now, my problem is I'm on my phone and I'm not on my computer, so I don't know if I can share screens. Ian, can you upload my exhibits, or do you want me to log on through my computer and I'll have just 2 logons and share my screen that way?
You can send me your exhibits if you'd like.
I emailed them to you a couple hours ago.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah. Mr. Swanson, we can continue while that's happening. So you talked about during your direct testimony that if you go down any, if you put the sign on a spandrel lower than the top one, that sign, it becomes obscured by vegetation or the telephone poles, correct?
Yes, primarily by, it depends on where it is, right? Left or right, but yes, telephone poles and or vegetation.
And now how obscured? Is it 100% obscured, or is it just in certain positions it's obscured and in other positions it's not?
It can be 100% obscured, but again, we're talking about a very a quick viewing angle. So much of your time that you can view the sign, it would be obscured.
And does it get more obscured as you go lower and lower spandrels, or the telephone poles obscuring the same amount?
Well, as you can see here, the lower you go, the more the vegetation begins to come into play.
Now, looking at this sign, we're looking at Exhibit T1, which was also Exhibit T1 at the prior hearing. This is the current banner that is on the garage right now, correct?
Yes.
And
So.
your new proposal is basically the same size. You just cut off the word medicine.
Yes, it's pretty similar. I think we determined the letters. The letters may be bigger. The shield is about the same size, right?
All right. But the PENN would be bigger.
Right, potentially.
Okay. So you're looking, okay. I'm just trying to organize things.
Actually, yeah, the shield's probably a little smaller and the lettering's a little bit bigger, but more or
Okay.
less the same size.
Ian, could we push down to the second page on this exhibit, please? No, not the second exhibit. The first exhibit has 3 pages. Thank you. So, looking at this exhibit, Mr. Swanson, to reiterate what Brad was raising earlier, it seems a little illogical that the sign could not be lower down on this building and still be basically viewable to the traveling public.
Again, this is one shot in time. You see that vegetation there really takes that out for most of all but a brief window. And then you also have horizontal, the horizontal wires which run across there as well, not all at the same plane.
Regardless of the telephone poles, what is let's strike that. The telephone poles weren't there. Would you be able to see the sign from the Blue Route on the bottom spandrel meeting the 15-foot height?
I don't think you'd
requirement?
be able. No, you wouldn't be able to see. As you can see, you can't see the bottom one. That bottom one that you're seeing in this photo is still above 15 feet height. The 15 feet is actually below that opening, or in that opening below this spandrel you can see in this.
Ian, can we push to the third page of exhibit T1, please?
Yeah, the 15 feet is in that first dark hall, the opening. And then there's a spandrel below that, which you can, just see is at the same level as the Jersey barrier along the Blue Route.
But obviously that the first spandrel above that big gap, if it wasn't for the telephone poles, you clearly could see the sign, correct?
From here? Yes.
Yes.
But not from when you're coming from the north headed south, because you can see all that vegetation, which is on a rate, the ground actually is higher than the Blue Route as you come from that direction until it opens up near that tall telephone pole.
All right. Ian, can you put up T3? Thank you. Mr. Swanson, do you recognize this building?
I do.
Is this the prior?
It's
facility?
the former, yes, the former facility. Mm-hmm.
And
and I think, yeah, you're on Radnor Chester Road, I guess. There, yes.
Yes. And that they're right there in the foreground, or in the right hand side in the middle. That's the old sign for the old facility, correct?
Yes.
No.
One of them.
And yeah. And if we can go to the second page, please. Is this another side of this facility?
Yes.
But no signage there, correct?
No, but there is a sign on that side of the building where the entry drive is.
Is it further down to the left?
Yeah, just a little bit. Yes.
Okay. And going to the third page, please, Ian. Is this another side of the building?
Yes. Can you go back? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That sign we looked at was on that face on Radnor Chester Road. There's one on Radnor Chester Road, and there's one on King of Prussia Road.
Okay.
At the drives the access to the building.
Okay.
So you would have driven, if you had this view and you were coming from King of Prussia Road, you would have already gone by the entrance.
Okay. And there's an entrance on King of Prussia Road, and there was an entrance on Radnor Chester Road to this facility.
Yes.
And there were signs at each of those entrances.
Yes.
And as far as you know, those signs were in conformance with zoning at the time they were installed.
I was not involved in that project, but I would assume the township would not have let them be installed if they were not.
And you're not aware of any prior variance that was applied for?
I am not.
If we can go to exhibit T4, please, Ian. And this is a view of the new facility under construction from King of Prussia Road, correct?
That's right.
And it's along this frontage that there is a sign.
There's just a sign at the entry that conforms to the, code, and then there's an entrance sort of back behind where that orange equipment is now at the entry canopy. It's at 15 feet high, but it's all the way back.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's a sign on the actual building.
Yes.
Over the entry to the building.
Yeah.
And then there's a sign to the public entry from King of Prussia Road, correct?
That's right.
And then
Yes.
there's a sign, there's actually a separate entry for deliveries, and there's a separate sign there, correct?
It's a very small sign. It's not about identity at that point.
But as
It's
far as
not
you
where
know,
it's not where you're trying to get patients to go.
right, well, the sign is indicating where deliveries go and patients not to go, correct?
That's right.
I couldn't hear you, sir.
Yes, that is right.
Okay. And as far as you know, these signs we just discussed that are along King of Prussia Road, they do comply with the zoning ordinance, and they were erected in compliance with the zoning ordinance, correct?
They were, yes.
You stated that the sign that's the subject of this appeal is primarily needed for wayfinding, correct?
Yes.
So and at the same time, you've also admitted that if you're going southbound on the Blue Route, by the time you see the sign, you're already past the exit, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So for southbound traffic, this sign.
So I object, actually. That was not his testimony, Peter. Traveling south, he did not say you missed the exit when you see the sign. It was traveling north.
Oh, God, now I'm mixing it up too. Thank you,
Yeah.
sorry. Traveling north.
I knew
yes.
what you were meaning, but yes.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Sorry for the confusion.
Yeah.
So traveling north towards the Turnpike and the Schuylkill Expressway, you're past the exit when you see the sign, correct?
Yes.
So the sign serves no wayfaring purpose to northbound travelers, correct?
Well, I think there's always a benefit for just building identities so that people see it and know where it is instinctively in the future, right? When they do need to find a facility.
Now, traveling south, you've said that it does serve a wayfinding purpose, and that's the primary purpose of this sign.
Yes.
Correct?
I did, yes.
If, Ian, can we go to exhibit T5, please? Mr. Swanson, this is an aerial of the site, correct?
I recognize it, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, okay. And the little red teardrop, is that a good approximate location where you can first see the proposed sign going south on the Blue Route?
Yes, approximately, yes, I would think.
Have you done any sort of study or measurement to determine the distance between that location where the red teardrop is and when you have to be on the on-ramp to get off at this exit?
I don't know the actual distance, but and I'm not sure that where that red dot is actually. Our documents had distance from when you can when you see the sign, and you saw in those photos how far the exit was from there, but I don't know the actual measurement.
Okay, did you do any measurement time-wise determining how long a person traveling 55, 60 miles per hour would have to see the sign and then get off the expressway.
We have some, I think last time we talked about the need for the height of the sign in order to be visible for, because you don't need much time when it's bigger, right? The bigger the sign, the less time you need to read it and to identify it. So that was part of our argument about its legibility and the time you have in order to recognize it.
And so at the last hearing, a woman by the name of Renee Orr testified. Do you remember that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And she testified on page 92 of the transcript that the big, quote unquote, the big factor here is that we have 3 lanes of traffic at a rate of 55 miles an hour and an opportunity of 3 seconds or probably closer to 2 where a person has.
So hold on, I object. Is Ms. Orr here tonight? On this application?
No, as far as I know.
So is Ms. Orr's testimony relevant specifically to our current application or to the previous application? If she's not here to distinguish, I'm not sure we can admit it. I know we're admitting the record, but that's at the discretion of the board to determine what in that record is applicable to this application. So without Ms. Orr, Mr. Riley, I don't know if we should be offering any statements from her. The board can take that under advisement.
It's sworn testimony. I just wanted to ask Mr. Swanson if he agreed with it. If it's going to cause a problem, I can, ask the question in another way.
Mr. Falcone, are you suggesting that Mr. Nelson is somehow mischaracterizing the application of the sworn testimony from the prior hearing, or simply that the witness in the prior hearing is not here to reiterate what she stated on the record in the prior hearing?
So I'm objecting to, in some way, both, Mr. Riley, because the application previously was different. It was a different size sign. And while I'm absolutely willing to move that transcript into the record, I don't think that we should be offering testimony from somebody who's not here based on a different sign without clarification as to what that is. So the board can take the transcript under advisement, but offering something without somebody to confirm what they were actually speaking to, I think is a dangerous proposition.
I don't think you can have it both ways. I mean, if he's agreeing to have the transcript in there in which that person was represented, the same attorneys are here, maybe an offer of proof is in order to make sure that he's not going to, Mr. Nelson, going to, improper areas, but still.
I would never, I mean, seriously, I would never accuse Mr. Nelson of trying to improperly
I am not
characterize.
suggesting that you are. All right, just back up for a second, please.
Let me just clarify. I am merely asking these questions to elicit from this witness the amount of time someone has upon first seeing this sign, that they can then make the decision to get off the roadway in a safe manner. And Ms. Orr testified as to those times. It has nothing to do with the size of the sign, the size of the lettering. It solely has to do with being able to see the sign and be like, oh, this is my exit. I need to get off. I think, this on the direct examination, this witness made it clear that this was, quote unquote, the primary reason for this sign.
So Peter, to your point, so we actually have Josh here tonight, who is, I think he's maybe Renee's boss or partner. So maybe those questions would be good for Josh, because he's going to offer kind of very similar testimony.
That's fine. I can hold off then.
Yeah. So just so you know what's coming down the road, no pun intended, but Josh will be here to give some thoughts on that.
Okay, let's proceed then. Thank you, counsel.
You're welcome.
Let's
all
proceed.
right. So I'll go. I'll wait for the next witness for that series of questions. Mr. Swanson, you testified that you are familiar with this area and with the site, correct?
Yes.
And you have driven to the site using the blue route thing, Lancaster Ave, King of Prussia Road to the site. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's true. Strike that. Is there a direct exit from the blue route directly to the Penn Medicine site?
No.
And in order to get to the Penn Medicine site from the blue route, you actually have to get off the blue route, take a right on Lancaster, take a left on King of Prussia, and then a right into the site, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And between this proposed sign on the blue route and the monument sign on King of Prussia by your entrance, there's no other wayfaring signs along that route, correct?
No. I mean, you're correct. There is no other sign.
And I think, I don't know if you testified in this hearing or the last hearing, but there's no emergencies being dealt with at this facilities. We're not getting ambulances. There's no emergency room, people driving to have emergencies dealt with, correct?
No, there are no emergent services here.
Okay. And that, the people coming here
There could be urgent services, not an urgent care, but people who have called the doctor and the doctor has said, come in right away.
Yeah. But for the most part, everyone is calling in and getting a scheduled visit.
So I'm distinguishing between urgent care and an appointment that you make weeks in advance. Particularly cancer patients can call in, and the physicians can say, I want to see you right now. Right. And not
yes.
in the emergency room, but here in Penn Medicine Radnor.
But those people, as well as the other types, they're all scheduling their appointments with these doctors. They're not just showing up, as far as you know.
Other than this case I'm just talking about, then you have to be just showing up, yes.
And I think you testified on your direct that the old facility, the old Penn facility at the corner of King of Prussia and Radnor Chester Road, that was there for over 20 years?
Yes. I'm not
and
sure.
that facility, approximately.
Yeah.
And that facility, I think you testified, did not have any type of signage along the blue route directing people at this exit to it, correct?
It did not, but it did not abut it does not abut the blue route. And I would also add that it didn't have some of the services that Penn Medicine provides now, particularly for ambulatory surgery and cancer care.
But that old facility is shut down, correct?
Yes.
And
as far as I know.
And the doctors and services that were being provided in that old facility have now been moved to this new one that is a subject of this application, correct?
Yes.
And ergo, it's probably a safe assumption that the patients that were being serviced by that old facility are now being serviced by this new one, correct?
If they need to continue to see a physician, there are plenty of new patients, both from, there are always new patients, but then there are also new services. So I would say probably, I don't know what that percentage is, but it's greater than half. I would guess.
Based on your testimony at the last hearing and the current hearing, do you believe this sign is critical for Penn in the operation of this facility?
Define critical.
Yeah, more than just a mere convenience.
It's more than a mere convenience. You can, look at any large medical building that you know, most of them have signs that are visible from, particularly from highways and destination, you know.
However, Penn Medicine purchased this property and built this facility before they obtained any assurances that this sign could be erected at this location at this height, correct?
That's true, yes.
And as far as, you know, the patients, you know, the patients are personally responsible to figure out how to get to their doctor at this facility, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, when you make an appointment, when a patient makes an appointment at the doctor's office, if they don't know where that office is, you know, they're gonna, you know, maybe the doctor might ask them, do you know how to get here? But, you know, it's up to the patient to make sure they know how to get there. Be it if they use a GPS or their phone, or if they just use a map, or if they get written directions from the doctor. It's the patients who ultimately is responsible to make sure that they know how to get to that doctor's office, correct?
Yes, but again, I'm not sure of your point.
Give me 2 seconds. I just want to make sure, but I think I might be done. I would I think I guess one last question for you, Mr. Swanson. As far as you can recall, the testimony you made last June at the hearing regarding the larger sign, is it, other than having to do with the size of the sign, is the rest of it all applicable to this particular application?
I don't remember my exact testimony, but yes, I would say, other than the differences in terms of size, my testimony would be the same.
Thank you, sir. I am done, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Questions from members of the board? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Falcone, if you'd care to continue.
Sure. If I could just ask Mr. Swanson one follow-up question with respect to Penn's network. I think that Mr. Nelson was getting at a little bit, if it would be okay with the board.
Sure.
So, Eric, I think you heard some questions from Mr. Nelson. I think they're good questions, and I think they speak to maybe the change in the way facilities are designed and used. Do you work on a pretty regular basis with hospital type institutions like the trustees and so forth?
I do, yes.
And a facility like Penn Medicine at Radnor, where we are now, it is different than existing Penn Med, or I can't even say existing Penn Med anymore, old Penn Med. Is that correct?
Yes, those services I was saying are more intense, and they include services that, you know, 20 years ago would have been in the hospital, but now they've moved to outpatient settings for convenience and, you know, due to new technologies, et cetera.
And so the question is, does Penn use a network of facilities to provide services to patients insofar as they move patients between facilities as either their sicknesses change or doctors come online at different facilities?
Yes, that certainly can happen. And as you probably know, many of your physicians might practice downtown 2 days a week, in Radnor 2 days a week, and maybe out in Valley Forge another day. So depending on the urgency with which you need to see them, you could be going from place to place.
And to that point, it's possible, and would you say likely, that this facility will serve, at times at least, new patients
Yes.
and patients that had never been to a Radnor Penn facility before?
Yes, well, and again, just new patients who are, coming to Penn Medicine for the first time.
Okay, so thank you. That's the only question, or line of questions, I should say. That's a very lawyerly statement to say one question of where I asked 10.
And Mr. Nelson, any cross on that last question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Falcone, let's proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riley. So I'd like to call my next witness, if it pleases the board, and that is Josh Jacobson. So if I could maybe have Josh turn on his screen and get sworn, that would be terrific.
Sir, if you'll raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And please state your name for the record, please.
Josh Jacobson, JOSH, JACOBSON.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Josh, can you identify for the board what we've marked as Exhibit A10? I should probably share my screen again. Is that okay, Mr. Riley?
Absolutely. Yeah, please.
Okay, how's that look? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So we've marked as Exhibit A11. This is just our cover sheet. I'm sorry, A10, a copy of your CV, and I've now brought that CV up. You were not here at the prior hearing, is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
You were not here at the prior hearing, is that correct?
No, I was. I just didn't testify, but I was at the.
Sorry. You were not called as a witness, I should say, in the prior hearing.
That's correct.
And by whom are you employed?
I'm actually employed by myself. I mean, I own and operate AGS.
And what is AGS?
AGS is a sign manufacturing company that offers design, programming, manufacturing, and installation of interior, exterior signage regionally and nationally.
And how long have you worked in the sign industry?
45 years.
And how long have you owned AGS?
45 years.
And does Exhibit A10 identify your kind of professional background?
I would say so, yes.
And are there specific certifications that go along with your industry? As an engineer might be certified in the state, does your industry have similar type certifications?
They do not.
And so your expertise would be gained or lost based on your personal experience and experience in the industry. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And have you offered testimony previously before boards or commissions in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yes, I have.
Have you been admitted as an expert in signage and sign design ever in the past?
I absolutely have, yes.
And we know Renee was previously admitted as an expert. What is your role with Renee? Does Renee work for you, with you? How does that?
Yes, Renee is a consultant. She works for me, and we were retained by Ballinger to provide all of the programming and signage wayfinding for the facility. But we were engaged with Ballinger's graphics team every step of the way.
And so, Mr. Riley, I would like to offer, as I did with Renee, Josh as an expert in sign design and implementation. Mr. Nelson may want to voir dire him.
Yeah.
I have
Peter?
no objection, no need to voir dire, no objection.
Thank
Okay,
you, Peter.
Mr. Jacobson's admitted as an expert. Let's proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Jacobson, it's good to know you were present at the prior hearing and heard that discussion regarding the signage. And you were also present this evening on the call, and you heard all the testimony offered by Mr. Swanson. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And does it accurately reflect your understanding and knowledge of the site?
It absolutely does, yes.
And you have visited the site, is that correct?
Many times.
And would you, just very briefly for the board, describe how you would describe the natural conditions surrounding this specific sign that went into your design and implementation of it?
So when we take a task like this, we start out in plan view, architectural drawings like that, and we determine best locations for, there are some branding moments, but a lot went into how the facility is operating and how it will enhance the visitor patient experience, and how it helps them get cues for where the building is whether they're driving on King of Prussia Road or whether they're driving on the Blue Route. There's just moments that kind of speak to identification. So there's a variable of wayfinding. It's actually wayfinding, just so the board knows. And all of those subject matters went into a thought process with Ballinger's team, Renee, and myself, where we felt signage would be appropriately identified.
And are you aware of the township's code requirements with respect to sign height in this zoning district?
I am now, yes.
And when you designed this sign in its current location, and between the last hearing and this current hearing, did you explore other locations and whether or not you believed those locations could safely and adequately provide the wayfinding that you've just described?
Yeah, without, kind of repeating what Mr. Swanson testified, we did all the same things as a team as to where we could potentially locate this, where there might be obstructions, how fast people are traveling on route, the Blue Route, where they're viewing it from, where they may not be viewing it from, what the potential is that they could see it from different angles. You can't see it from every single angle based on some of the speeds that you're going. But there were variables other than just placement, based on my wayfinding and experience and locating signage on buildings, that went into consideration when we looked at this particular spot.
And have you worked in this industry, not just the sign industry, but have you worked with providers like the trustees that provide medical services in the past?
Absolutely. Yep.
And in your experience, does signage based on the industry type vary in importance?
Well, yes. I mean, historically, it typically in the past, it was more of a facilities decision, more of an operational decision. Today, it's at the COO and the CFO conversation, because it's not just about a brand, although it's extremely important because Penn does have a strong brand. But really the criteria for putting signage on the building is obviously to be code compliant as best we can. But it is an experience that the visitor and the patient is going to have coming and leaving this facility. And that's a very, very serious consideration in healthcare today, because it's more of a hospitality moment rather than just an urgent care moment. With costs in healthcare, they want them to have a good experience and a healthy experience when they come to these facilities.
And does safety play a role in the way that you design signs and locate signs?
I would absolutely say it does. Sometimes the The limits are stretched when they can without compromising safety. One of the examples that I would give you is in this particular case, the demographics that are coming to this facility are probably on the little older side than the younger side, unless they're being, handheld with a son or a daughter, or they're able. So coming to these kinds of facilities is more an event, not just one moment. There's a planning process that people have before they come to these facilities. And I can speak to that because my mother was being cared for at a healthcare facility, and it was circled on her calendar when she was going to need to come to this facility for care. She wanted to know how she was going to get there and what to look for when she drove. And Google was not always the best way. There are mechanisms, but all of those go into the consideration of where we place signs.
And so I'm glad you hit Google, but so Renee fielded some questions in the last hearing about why a sign is truly necessary. And I think we heard a little bit of those questions from Mr. Nelson tonight as to whether you actually need signage based on the prior Penn building. When combined with the new technology that moves people from place to place, why do you need a sign on this building?
The best answer, and I thought that Eric handled it great, is that it just becomes an awareness of where the facility is. Not everybody that comes to the facility on that specific day is actually going to enter that facility, but it provides them with an understanding of where that facility may be located, whether it's King of Prussia Road or whether it's the Blue Route, so that when they do embark on that path of travel, they have a pretty good understanding of where that destination is. Now, obviously, you can't make a right-hand turn off of the Blue Route and get to this garage. We all understand that. It's logic, but it does provide some awareness for people to understand that there it is, I'm close, so I can get there from this point. And that's a part of the conversation that we have, not only from an architectural perspective, but we also have that conversation with the stakeholders at Penn. So this sign, just didn't pop up in this location. It was well thought out. And we know we're stretching the limits here a little bit with trying to meet the codes and the requirements, and we respect that. And that's why we came back with something that was legible, understated, and in fairness to that wayfinding or queue, we felt that that was an appropriate location for it. And all of the other ones seem to have been obstructed.
So to that point, Josh, does this sign stand alone, or is it part of an overall sign package that when viewed together creates an overall wayfinding experience?
I would agree with the latter. It is a comprehensive, well thought out process to create a brand and identification cues at different entry points and different visible points from any major road that a patient, a visitor, and or physicians that are coming to get to this destination.
And so I want to go now to Exhibit A9, because it was an exhibit that Renee used. And I think Peter was getting at some of this in questioning earlier, and hopefully you can maybe clarify it. But the first thing I think we need to do is clarify for the board how in our previous application, we stated that a sign over 80 feet was the minimum necessary. And now we're able to come back at a sign that's 40 feet and still satisfy that. What's changed in that regard? Is this sign still appropriate? Does it still work?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's some formulas, and I know Mr. Nelson asked that question to Eric about, what kind of studies have we done? From the Blue Route, the studies they're fundamental studies, which is speed of travel and letter height. And I would agree with Mr. Nelson to some degree. I know maybe I'm not supposed to do that here, but I would agree that, your queue from that road is quick. And it is, depending upon where where you're driving, will you see it or will you won't see it? But I don't think it's just that particular moment when you're coming to the facility. It's an awareness that the building is there and people drive by it all the time, so that if they happen to need an identification that they're coming to the facility and they didn't know they were coming when they saw it the first time, they will have a cue to say, oh, there's the Penn Medicine facility that I'm going to in the next 10 days, the next 2 weeks. I have an understanding of where it is off the Blue Route. It may then say, let me Google map it so that I can then reassure myself, but it just offers another level of quality and identification. It's not the cure-all to how people are going to get to this facility.
So I guess using this exhibit A9, how does this relate to the sign that is being proposed and the relief that we're seeking tonight?
So I have to tell you that I've looked at it a little bit. So what it does is it tells you what the speed is on the Blue Route and what they're traveling, and what the letter height should be at that speed with that distance. And that's what this matrix does. So we've accomplished that as best we could within the code and the ordinance. Obviously, we're trying to press the limit a little bit so that there's legibility. But this matrix kind of reassures that the letter size is appropriate for that driving distance.
And that's your testimony tonight, that the sign that's proposed is appropriate and safe at that speed and distance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are the dangers of signage that is impaired for a driver?
Not sure how to answer that question. I think the best way to answer it is, you don't want anybody driving in a vehicle to take too much time to see their cue. So it's important that that sign be located at the appropriate location from that view, so that their peripheral vision is more in alignment with seeing that sign rather than having to turn around or turn their head. And I guess the A7 gives that example, is that when you're driving in this direction, there's no question that you peer left, right, you see who's in the right lane, who's in the left lane, and you will see that cue at the top of the building on the parking garage relatively easy. And that's the objective here, is to make it as easy and as directive as possible to see that sign on the corner.
Does it get more difficult at higher speeds to see a sign at a lower height from this distance?
I would say so. And, everybody has a different, viewing perspective. I think the younger that you are, probably the easier it might be to see something like that. But when you have to look through, things that get in the way, like poles or trees or whatever might be in the way, it will distort the sign a little bit. So in this particular case, we tried to find the right location for the viewing eye, so there wouldn't be any obstruction.
And so we've marked exhibit A7, and I think it shows kind of the impairment, but I actually think the township's exhibit T2 is a better exhibit. So perhaps we could have Ian pull that exhibit up, exhibit T2.
I think it's actually T1, page 2.
That's it. Thank you, Peter. So Josh, looking at this exhibit, the orientation from this picture, again, Peter, that was T1, page 2?
Yes.
Thank you. Looking at T1, page 2, is the orientation staring directly at the building, at the opening on the blue route, not looking down the road, directly at the building?
It is.
And in this instance, what is the first unimpaired spandrel?
I'll have to go back to Eric on that one. It's obviously the top tier of the parking garage where the unfortunately that not so attractive banner was placed. But.
And if this sign were moved to the right, would it be viewable from this perspective on, I believe this is traveling south on the blue route based on what I'm seeing here. Mr. Nelson can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like it's traveling southbound
Yes.
on the blue route.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Obviously, it gets a little bit more challenging because of the trees and some of the wiring there. I mean, again, I'll be very transparent. I guess if you trimmed the trees, you could move it a little bit to the right. And I think we looked at that as well. But when we design these signs and we put them in a certain placement, we want some continuity to the architecture of the building. It's an important conversation as opposed to placing it in the middle. We spoke about where do we feel that the best viewing site is, and it became, that kind of leverage kind of margin left was probably the best location.
And in your opinion, based on your experience, could the sign be placed lower and still provide safe viewing at speeds on the blue route?
I don't believe that would work.
And is that a result of Penn's construction?
No.
What is it a result of?
Well, it's more telephone wires and trees, telephone poles, things that are just, normal obstructions on any construction site from certain viewing areas. We had the same situation on the front signage at King of Prussia Road where we put up a prototype before we actually manufactured and placed the sign for that very reason, because there were obstructions there. There were, traffic lights and boxes, curves. So you just don't put a sign up without really thinking it through, because there is some serious safety conditions that you just need to make sure that you're following.
And does speed impact? So let me rephrase. When traveling at higher speeds, does signage that is impaired in some way create a more unsafe condition than if you were traveling at slower speeds?
Yeah, logically, the answer is yes.
And to your knowledge, did the trustees of University of Pennsylvania set the speed limit on the blue route?
No, they did not.
And was the blue route there when they purchased this property?
Yes.
And they did not create an on-ramp. I think Mr. Nelson had asked, they didn't create an on-ramp here. There's no exit or on-ramp to the Blue Route directly to this site.
That is correct.
In your opinion, is the proposed signage at its proposed height the minimum relief necessary to provide safe signage for this location?
Yeah, based on my experience and doing this many, many times, I would say yes.
I have no other questions for Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Yes, just 1 second, please. Okay, Mr. Jacobson, good evening, sir.
Good evening to you, Mr. Nelson.
So you
Did I get a
testified.
bourbon before I answer these questions, or am I was going to get a bourbon before I answered your.
Go right ahead, sir. Yes.
Good.
I'll start off easy with you.
That's fine.
Yeah. You testified you were at the hearing back on June 4th in 2020, correct?
I was, yeah.
And you heard Ms. Orr testify at that hearing?
I did, yeah.
Do you remember anything she testified that you disagreed with or thought was wrong?
Didn't read the transcript, but she was hired by us and worked directly with me and Ballinger. I would say that I was pretty comfortable with it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. As far as I think you testified that is having signs higher is better because they're more visible. People tend to look that way, correct?
Yeah, I think the eye from the, driving in a vehicle tends to be a little bit more on an upswing rather than down or, parallel to the car. Yes. Could not there be instances when a sign is actually too high that a driver in a car can't see it because it's blocked by their roof of the car? Potentially, yes.
Do you know if anyone did any studies to make sure that this sign was not too high where it is in its current location or its proposed location? Sorry.
I wouldn't say that there were any studies, but I've driven that route dozens and dozens of times coming in each direction. So before we planned the plan, we made sure that that was a conscious effort to make sure that that sign being located at that specific area was not going to be obstructed. But yes, there are instances where your roof or the viewing distance where you may need to duck is a concern. But in this case, it wasn't. But I don't have any technical, engineered studies on that.
And I asked this question of Mr. Swanson. I'll ask you. Are you aware of any studies as to the amount of time a person has upon first seeing the sign and then getting off at the Villanova St. David's exit?
I don't know.
Do you know the distance between that point where you can see the sign and getting off at that exit?
No, I don't. I would imagine hundreds of feet though, but I don't.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I said I don't.
And Mr. Jacobson, isn't it possible that having a sign there for wayfinding purposes actually is detrimental if there is not enough time to see the sign and then get off at the exit?
I don't believe that that is the case. So
I'm not saying if it is or isn't, but if it, could that be the case? If there is not enough time to get off the exit, does that make the sign actually detrimental as opposed to helpful?
I guess it could. Yeah.
Are you familiar? Are there any other exits off of the Blue Route for Villanova, St. David's, Wayne, this area?
No, I don't believe there are.
The prior exit going southbound is actually for Conshohocken 76, correct?
Yeah.
And the following exit is for Upper Darby and Broomall, correct?
Correct.
And, both those exits are several miles away from this current exit at St. David's and Villanova, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the chances of confusing exits is probably not very high.
Correct.
Now, I think your testimony is that, this sign is very important for this facility in enabling people to locate the facility and find their way to the facility, correct?
I do believe that it is an enhancement in that subject matter. I don't think it's the only mechanism for finding the building or the destination. It's a cue. And as I stated in testimony, it's one of the many cues that take place on that campus that help people safely navigate to the facility. It's not the only reason, but yes, it is.
When you say Q, you mean CUE, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I got that. Thank you.
Not the letter.
And based on what you just testified, if for whatever reason Penn Medicine can't have a sign in this location, it doesn't make the facility non-viable. It's still going to function, correct?
Yes, it would still function.
And that, even if you get to put the sign up, there's always a possibility that that sign could eventually be blocked by taller vegetation or sound barriers put up by PennDOT, because Penn Medicine has no control over that view from the Blue Route, correct?
I guess the answer is yes. I don't know whether that would happen, but yeah, I think we're speculating here, but sure.
Now, I've driven on this the Blue Route several times also, and I noticed that there are wayfaring signs, official highway signs for the various colleges and universities in the area. Has Penn Medicine approached PennDOT to see whether or not they can have an official wayfaring sign along the Blue Route instead of relying on this one proposed on their garage?
I don't think I'm in a position to answer that. I would have no idea.
Okay, so you weren't involved in doing that, correct?
I've not been approached to do that. That would be on Penn Medicine to do that.
Okay, 1 second. I think I might be done here. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members of the board? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Falcone, anything further?
You're on mute.
Perfect. I was saying goodnight to my kids. I didn't want everybody to hear. So thank you for reminding me to turn it off. If Penn had a sign on the Blue Route, as Mr. Nelson suggested, would it preclude, in your opinion, the need for this wall sign?
You mean a PennDOT?
A PennDOT sign.
No, I think that both of them would be applicable.
Okay, so I have no additional questions for Mr. Jacobson.
Mr. Nelson?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in real fast. I'm sorry. If there were a sign put up by PennDOT, the wayfinding aspect of the sign on the garage would be rendered less necessary. Would that be a fair statement if there were both northbound and southbound, an indication that in 1 mile the Penn Medicine at Radnor facility may be found?
So, I guess in theory that may be the case, but when you're dealing with the kind of healthcare that they provide, and again, I'll just use my mother as an example. They're looking for that building, even though there may be a PennDOT sign. They may have driven by it. They're looking for that queue, and it's just another piece of the enhancement of that campus for people to locate it and understand that they're near it, And then even if there was a PennDOT sign, they would even feel more secure about then exiting off of that ramp because they've seen the building. Otherwise, it just looks like a parking garage and there's no queue for that. So as understated as we can possibly get with putting a sign up there, which I do think it is extremely understated and elegant, there's no flashing lights. I think both are necessary, but push came to shove. If you just put a PennDOT sign up, I would imagine they could still find their way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Falcone, anything further?
No, not from me, Mr. Riley.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nelson?
I am not calling any witnesses. I would just like to ask that exhibits T1 through 27 be omitted, with exhibit T6 being the transcript from the last hearing, and exhibit T7 being the zoning hearing board's decision of that last hearing.
Mr. Falcone, thoughts on that?
I have no objection to that. I would also like to move my exhibits that we've marked this evening into the record and incorporate the transcript. I have no objection to that from Mr. Nelson and to any of his exhibits for that matter.
Mr. Nelson, any objection to that?
No, not at all. Thank you.
Okay, the party's exhibits will be admitted. Ian, is there anyone on the Zoom from the public that would like to participate?
John, I'm not seeing any hands raised for public comment at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. With that, I would ask for a motion on the application for relief.
John, actually, I have a question. I don't know if it's appropriate now to ask it before the motion, or so maybe
Depends on what the question is.
Yeah. So I'd like some understanding of the importance of the wayfaring component of what's been presented to us tonight. And I don't know if that should come from Mr. Falcone or if that's something that we would deliberate on as a board.
Rich, you mean in addition to the testimony that's been presented by the two witnesses, is that right?
Yeah, in other words, I understand factually what the argument of wayfaring is, but I guess legally, how does that impact what we're trying to decide tonight? Does it have any impact? Or is it just a factual argument?
I mean, if the board wishes, I think both Mr. Falcone and I would be willing to give quick legal synopsis to cover that and the rest of it.
I have no objection to that. Why don't we do that, and then we can move on. Excuse me, move on to the motion. Go ahead, guys.
You want me to go first, Peter?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Mr. Falcone, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. So just kind of pretty quickly, we see this sign, the wayfaring component, as it pertains to the relief we're seeking, being, a permitted wall sign, and then what is permitted is not visible. And we believe that the wall sign is necessary for wayfinding, but it's also by itself a permitted sign. So when we look at the entire sign package that the university put through, that the trustees put through, this was a sign that they identified as important. And they identified it as important for all the reasons you heard tonight. It gets people from the Blue Route to the exit ramp where they pick up additional signage on King of Prussia Road and say, this is where I'm headed. But I think it should be clear, and I think it's a good question that gets to it. We're not seeking any type of variance to actually install the sign itself. The sign itself can go there. What we're seeking is a variance with respect to height, and we are seeking that as a result, in our position, of natural conditions that exist on the site that make a permitted sign no longer a viable option in the wayfaring purpose. So the purpose as we see this sign is for wayfinding at permitted height. It doesn't serve that purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Initially, I think there's just three overall issues I think the zoning hearing board needs to address. The first one was raised at the first hearing. It's a question of whether or not This is actually an allowed sign under section 123. Are they allowed, as they have stated, to actually have a sign upon this parking garage? The second issue is, the witnesses testified that this is essentially the same application as the one back in last June. The only difference is the sign itself has been shrunk down to a permissible size under the zoning ordinance. Everything else is exactly the same. And therefore, I think all the board's decisions that were made back to that in that June 4th hearing are applicable here. And arguably, I think res judicata and collateral estoppel apply here. And that this variance should be denied on those bases. And thirdly, I think the applicant is kind of putting the rabbit in the hat. Just because, as they claim, they have a legal right to put up this sign, and that the only thing they need relief on is the height, doesn't mean they're guaranteed to put that sign up. There are no guarantees in zoning. Zoning provides the ability, what's permitted and what's not permitted. It doesn't say if it's permitted, you're absolutely positively going to be able to do it. No, it doesn't work that way. But throughout this entire hearing, I think the applicant's witnesses have kind of acted like, yeah, we should be guaranteed to put this up, and therefore that's why we should get this variance. That's not the case. They're lucky enough that they have, they're against the blue route and they are visible from the blue route. There's a lot of places in the PLO that don't have that positioning, and therefore don't even have a chance to put a sign up. But just because they're in that position doesn't mean we have to allow them to put a sign up there. No, the only thing we have to allow them to put a sign up is if they fully comply with all the ordinance provisions, and they don't. And if you go through them, there's 5 requirements for a variance. There is no hardship here. They're using the property fully and completely. They've admitted that if they couldn't put this sign up, the property would still be used. It'd still be viable. They bought the property before they guaranteed that this sign could be put up. It's a self-created hardship here. It's something that the sign is a convenience to them. It's not a necessity. It's not something that they can't use a property without this variance. And I think they've also really failed to truly prove that this sign at the height proposed is the absolute minimum variance necessary. They say this is where we want the sign. It's where it's most visible. But I don't think they presented evidence showing that the sign is not functional, 0% functioning at a lower height. It's just not as functional as they want it to be. And for those reasons, I think that, the zoning hearing board should decide, like they decided after the hearing on June 6th or June 4th last year, that this variance should be denied. Thank you.
So, Mr. Riley, I think I have to say that was kind of way outside what the question was. And so I would say, I fundamentally disagree with almost everything Mr. Nelson said. And I think if we're going to raise the issue of res judicata, whether or not the sign is permitted, I think the party should brief the issue for the board before the board renders a decision, because Mr. Nelson has raised specific legal arguments before the board just in this very last conclusion to Mr. Weitzman's question. We're happy to brief it. Again, I think it's a misdirection. I think it's improper. I think it's wrong. And so if that's going to be the issue that this board considers here, I think we should have the opportunity to brief it for you and for your solicitor so that you can consider the law on the issue.
I'm sorry, Mr. Falcone, if you felt surprised by this. As far as the issue regarding whether or not the sign is actually allowed, that was raised at the original hearing. So I'm just reiterating it. As far as res judicata, I kind of felt that was pretty self-evident. So I apologize if you feel surprised.
It's not a surprise. I just thought that was beyond what Mr. Weitzman was asking for. You gave kind of a conclusory statement. So, and I'm happy to brief it, Peter.
Gentlemen, let's see if the board's deliberation takes a turn towards
those issues that I can say but not spell, namely res judicata and collateral estoppel. If the board's discussion trends in that direction, it may be appropriate to ask for counsel to brief the issue. But at this point, I'm going to hold that issue in abeyance and see where the deliberation takes us. With that being the case, I would ask again for a motion on the application.
May I just jump in?
We need a motion first.
I'm going to give one.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Then you may jump in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would move that the application be denied.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. John Nagel seconds. Board discussion on the motion.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I was here at the last hearing, and I am certainly sympathetic to Mr. Nelson's argument that we're hearing the same thing over again. It's just a matter of the wall sign happens to be smaller. I had issues with the size of the height of the wall sign there. I thought they're asking for something that was not the minimum relief necessary, and certainly do not believe that wayfaring is a hardship, because it's certainly not unique to this property. I think if we were to give a sign to Penn, I think suddenly on the northbound side, all those buildings and restaurants will now be asking the same thing, because it's, hey, they're helping people find where they are. And to me, that's just not a viable hardship. I'm certainly sympathetic when it said, boy, what happens if a sound barrier comes up? And they say, well, now I got to put it 15 feet higher because something out of my control. They put a sound barrier up and I need to show people where we are. And it's just like kind of going, I'm not finding a hardship here at all. And I'm not convinced that that wayfaring is just enough. And if anything, I might be sympathetic to giving some relief, but not this extreme. I can understand why 15 feet is not reasonable given the visibility going down. I get that. That absolutely makes sense. I think we would probably all be in agreement that this code was written as if it was a street. You're at street level looking at a building on your right and your left, not from a highway. That's not really the purpose of this ordinance, but this is what we have. And so I'm just not in favor of it.
Thanks, Brett. John Nagel?
A little history for you all. When we wrote these codes, we had a lot of public input with the concern for what in those days were called tower lights and tower signage. The people that testified or commented were not in favor of them. Not sure if it can actually be seen from any homes, although there is one street over there that all the way on the end, we could see the height of the buildings when we did a balloon test. And also, I don't buy the wayfaring arguments at all. But all that aside, this is not the minimum relief we could give them. You could go down 2 spandrels lower, and some of the hardships, like the vegetation, are very manageable issues that Penn could work out with SEPTA, which is where those trees are, is SEPTA right away or PennDOT's right away. So they're not insurmountable. I also think, having sat through so many meetings where we had experts testify, on a previous request to have a top high sign, a traffic expert testified, and he's not here, I know, Dave, but he testified that the higher signs are actually less safe for the vehicles. that anything you do to avert the sight lines cause the person to look up or over to the sign actually creates or increases the hazard. So I think they could easily drop two spandrels. But as far as the current application, I can't support it.
Okay, other board members? Mr. Lord?
I was not at the first iteration of this, but I did take the time to very carefully review the transcript and the documents. I don't think that we're really in a situation of res judicata as it's meant in a true trial situation has any application here. But there was a burden, there is a burden that doesn't shift on the applicant to show something different that would and should or could influence the board to move in a direction away from the denial the first time. I don't think that increases the burden, but it does give them a second bite of the apple. And frankly, I haven't heard anything that has really changed the testimony that was produced the first time. The sign's a little bit smaller, but it's still in the wrong place. They have to show a hardship, and they just can't show a hardship. They want a sign up there, not for wayfaring. I mean, that's just so much smoke and mirrors. As a matter of fact, that sign, I believe, because I can express my opinion just like all the other folks here expressing opinions. You're driving down the highway at 55 miles an hour, getting ready to get off of that at that exit. You've got to be paying attention to where you're going. There's a sign that tells you that you're half a mile from, there's a sign that says you're a mile, then a half a mile. And then the exit comes up right at a curve. And that sign is over there. And you got to be paying attention, otherwise you'll go past it. You don't need to be looking at an advertisement, which is all this is, hanging off of a garage. It's not even on the building. It's not even on the medical building. I understand that you know, University of Pennsylvania, the Penn Medicine, it's a huge operation. But if it's that huge, and it is, and it's that powerful, which it is, they can go to PennDOT and they can get a sign up there. They get more than one sign, an appropriate sign that complies with all federal regulations that are imposed on interstate highways like 476. And those signs, and I've had cases involving these types of signages. Those signs are there because they're designed by professionals who know how to design a road, know how to design a sign for high-speed travel. And this thing hanging on the side of a garage is not conducive to a safe environment. I'm convinced of that. And I'm also convinced that there is no hardship. They can use the building. I'm not even sure I agree with Mr. Nelson. I'm not even sure they're permitted to put a sign up there where they want to put it because it's on a garage. But they can still use the building. We haven't had one bit of testimony to show that there was some diminution in the use of this building attributable to something other than the pandemic, which may have boosted their business. We haven't gotten anything like that, that this quote unquote Wayfair sign is somehow going to improve the traffic and the number of people coming into this institution. We haven't heard one word, one piece of hard evidence that there's a certain number of patients who have called up and said, hey, you know what? I blew right past that intersection. It'd be nice if you put a sign on the building for Pete's sake. Nothing. We have nothing. Just wild ass speculation, also known as WASP. And that's what we've heard. So I don't think on that basis we can just ignore the zoning ordinance and grant them what they're asking for.
Mr. Weitzman, any thoughts?
Nothing more articulate than what I've already heard.
Okay, well, undeterred and not at all slowed down by others' eloquence, I'm just going to weigh in on a couple things. First, I think in fact, from where I'm sitting, there is a meaningful difference between the relief that's being requested in this application and the relief that was being requested in the prior application. As has been noted in the testimony, the prior application had issues with both size of the sign and height of the sign. The applicant, mindful of the board's consideration in the prior hearing, came back and expended time and effort to come up with a smaller sign, which reduced the amount of relief that they were requesting from this board as or in comparison to the prior sign, but still obviously had the height issue that had to be dealt with. I raised the issue in the prior hearing. I raised it again this evening. I'm not certain that the applicant is entitled to the sign in that location in any event, given the use of the facility and it not being strictly used for office purposes. That's what gets you a wall sign. And there's ample testimony both in the prior hearing and in this hearing that it's not solely an office use. And I don't think that they have the ability to put the sign up in the first instance, whether it's 50 feet off the ground, 15 feet off the ground. I just don't think that they have the right to affix the sign to the structure in the first case. So I'm also going to, I will vote in favor of denying the motion again. So at this point, I'm going to call the vote. If I can find my notes, bear with me for a second. I'm just going to wing it. Mr. Lord, on the question of whether to deny the application, how do you vote?
I vote to deny.
Mr. John Nagel,
Vote to deny.
Mr. Rich Weitzman,
Vote to deny.
Mr. Brad Delizia,
Deny.
and I vote to deny the application as well. There being no further business before us this evening, it is still this evening, right? We will adjourn for this evening. We have a special meeting to go through the remainder of the May meeting applications. That meeting will be held on Thursday, June the 3rd, 7 o'clock, Zoom and YouTube for those of you that are hanging in with us at home. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.